Suzy Wrong. Joy Drive with Dee and Warren's film, TV and theatre reviewer.
Suzy Wrong on Joy Drive.
Hello there, how is everyone?
We're
Hey,
pretty
Suzy.
good. We're getting over the shock of that show that you made us watch. I mean, it was a beautiful show. It's called It's a Sin. It's streaming on Stan in Australia. Now, tell us about it.
It is 1981 London, and a group of 18-year-olds form a close friendship, or a chosen family, as those of us in the future would call them. They have left their respective hometowns to find exciting lives as new grown-ups. But because the four boys in the group are gay, it is the AIDS virus that becomes a dominant force in how they experience their new lives in London. Now, Dee and Warren, do you feel like the AIDS epidemic has sort of defined a lot of your personalities?
Not so much mine.
Definitely mine. Suzy, I sit down each time to watch our review homework and I expect to be entertained. And It's a Sin was different. I love it, but I'll be honest, it covers a lot of detail of what it was like being gay in the 80s. It was so good that it was triggering. It was extremely emotional. There was not an episode that I wasn't in tears. It brought back a lot of things that I'd completely forgotten about and sometimes still do and forget where they came from. And if you just look at being, a gay person in the 80s and, the fear, that fear of HIV, that fear of AIDS, that constant checking for lesions, being ignored by relatives at funerals, friends being desperate for treatment, losing friends, it all completely came back. And in fact, I found myself grieving over the past week watching it, lots of friends that we'd lost to HIV and AIDS over the 80s period.
Yeah, that's really sad to hear, actually. But I did feel the same, a lot of it, especially the really personal stuff like checking for lesions, because you're so terrified to see the doctor every time you have sex, right? But I felt like in this one, this is the first in Britain where they've done an English sort of AIDS drama, and we have seen, last few months we spoke a lot about the stuff in America. They've done quite a few there. But I feel like this one, I think because with the passage of time, there's a lot of joy in these stories as well. That these people are having a great time, trying to have a great time in spite of all that. And I think that was my experience of it. You knew that, under... the underbelly was terrifying. If anything happened to you, it was going to be horrible. But you tried very hard to have a good time. And also because you're so young, you can't do anything but to have a good time.
Yeah, I actually really liked that about this. I felt that it wasn't as preachy as some of the American shows we've seen, and it really shows the sensibility of British filmmaking, the idea that there was that kind of FM, we're going to have a good time. There was a bit of... Particularly, don't you find, Suzy, when you watch anything now in the context of a global pandemic, it sort of pales slightly? The AIDS pandemic will never pale in our minds, but it's sort of like, they didn't even know what was coming when the AIDS pandemic came, and having had that, you didn't know that this was coming as well. It's sort of, if we knew then what we know now, we'd know better about how something can get out of hand so quickly.
And I think we've also forgotten what the HIV, epidemic was like and the fear that was around. And we know there were some parallels with the COVID pandemic as well. If you think about it, our need to want to control something that was unknown. We went out and bought toilet paper just for something to make us feel like we were being in control.
And the psychological denial that so many people are going through as well.
Exactly. And the conspiracy theories that came up to fill that whole knowledge void, that, of not knowing what this virus is. There's a lot of parallels with HIV.
And also the internal fighting, like even within the gay community, there was fights between people about, I believe it and I don't believe it. But there's something that came up. There's a lot of hospital scenes, and it is quite, no spoilers, but we all know what happened. But the role of women, mothers, and there's gay women in here as well, but the straight woman that is the central character in the friend group. It just shows that it was out. Those allies were a massive part of this pandemic as well.
Yeah, it's wonderful that they didn't wipe out women as they usually do with these stories. It was great that, Jill, the central female character, had so much in the story and was such an admirable character. I do have a criticism about the women, though. I found that there was a lot about male sexuality and all the women were sexless. I found that one was not very nice. Like, they were all motherly characters. They were all amazing or a little bit disappointing mothers, but they were all mothers. And I felt like in that way, it could have been a little bit better, the women, especially with Jill, because we saw so much about Jill, and the boys were having fun all the time, and she was just mothering them all the whole time, which I felt made her a little bit flat.
Yeah, but it also was such an intrinsic part of her character. It's like she's devoted her life to loving these boys and raising them as their chosen. You know, you go back to Pose. It's like she was the house mother for those boys. It's sort of like that was their house, and that's the role she'd allocated. She was the grown up. She was the homeowner, and she mothered them and then nursed them. It was. You know.
But the real mothers also were scene stealers, right?
Yeah.
The mother who was one of them was in a wheelchair, and she's a real sort of actor with disability. So a lot of points for them for finding such a wonderful character for this wonderful actress. And also Keely Hawes, many of us know her from the Durrells and the Bodyguard, other BBC shows like that, British shows like that. Her work at the ending bits, the last few scenes, was just tremendous. I feel like it's one of the most amazing things you'll see on screen.
I don't know which character you mean. Who's that?
Valerie, the mother of... the mother of the main boy, Richie.
Yeah. And the thing that they do touch on, I think, and this was probably one of the saddest things that I think upset me during the whole show, was Richie apologising for having AIDS to his mother, who was, you know, one of the most deceptive and horrible people out there, and him having to apologise for having something that, you know, was no fault of his own. And they dealt with it quite well, that whole shame of being gay, the shame of having HIV and AIDS, that internal shame that, you know, results from not being loved by those that really should love us and make us feel like we are worthy of being loved. And I think that, you know, something that makes us, you know, it's rather poignant that we're talking about this today, you know, the day after Margaret Court received the highest honour in the country, a woman who perpetuates this exact shame, and a Prime Minister whose silence sanctions it, as far as I'm concerned. And it's that shame that led to many unnecessary deaths from HIV in the 80s and 90s. And I think that this series captures that perfectly.
It's incredibly powerful the way they were able to sort of break that into...
No, don't leave us now, Suzy Wrong.
To sort of easy to recognize parts. You know, how do you relate? Have you lost
You're
me?
back. No, you're back.
You're back.
Hello?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. It's really incredibly poignant the way that the show was able to let us see all these fragments and all these important elements of how gay male sexuality is used against them, and then gay males in turn ingest all these negativity and you know, fight themselves and fight each other and have all these sort of shame and then AIDS was the 80s, but I think now still, like, a lot of gay men walk around bearing this guilt and this shame, mostly from their families, but, you know, like you said, at no fault of their own.
Exactly. And then we go out and we want validation from, you know, sex, or from getting physical bodies, you know, that are amazing and muscular, and all this other external validation, so that we can overcome this internalized shame. I think it's really sad.
Yeah, and the way you can see, they have these beautiful sexual sequences that has so much to do, even though they were beautiful to look at, they will have so much to do with this sort of insatiable need, this sort of incurable disease, not just the AIDS, but this sort of need to be validated constantly. And I see a lot of my peers, you know, they're well into their 40s, 50s, then they're still carrying on the same. You know, I have accepted that, right, it is a part of gay life that is about promiscuity, and it's a lot about sex, and it is just something that has been almost in our blood, and we almost can't walk away from it anymore. And I hope the young ones don't have the same, but I'm not sure.
Well, so speaking with Suzy Wrong, our film, TV and theatre reviewer all the way from Sydney, we're talking about It's a Sin, which is it 8-part series, Suzy? Five-part series on streaming on Stan. We've just had a little bit of a message from somebody saying, please don't go into as much detail as you are. Some of us haven't seen it all. I think... I don't think we've given any spoilers. It's a narrative that we know. It's during the AIDS pandemic, and we know that there are deaths. We don't know who.
But I would definitely encourage everyone to go out and watch it. Great recommendation, Suzy.
Yeah, I love this one. It was really powerful.
I would watch it again. I think there's bits that I missed. I think that something about... Well, the director also made Years and Years, which is one of my absolute favourite series from 2 years ago. Did you see that, Susie?
Make Queer as Folk
Queer
as
as Folk.
well.
The good version, the British version.
Yeah, so he's really prolific and really, really talented. The writing is amazing. He did want to do an 8 episode out of this, which would have given, maybe the women characters a bit more dimension to them. But with 5 episodes, I thought he did amazingly well. And the stuff with the racial diversity is also, I think I've never seen it done so well, to be honest. Like, there was a Dominican lead, and there was an Indian lead, there was an African lead, and they all sort of lived sort of seamlessly and very convincingly.
I agree.
We've got a text in here for you, Susie, asking you to review the importance of the narrative. Female sexuality isn't part of that. Well, I think female sexuality probably is part of the youth culture in London in the 80s. How do you respond to that?
I feel like the problem being the women characters were very important in the narrative. And because especially with Jill, the Dominican lady who sort of nursed everyone and was the through sort of the important through line of it all, we were only able to see that side of her that was, nurturing and mothering, whereas the boys, had a lot more dimension. They were good, they were bad, they were good, they were bad again. But this woman kind of wasn't allowed to be bad, and I think that's not really healthy. If you're a woman watching things like that, trying to be an ally and watching things like that, and you think that, oh, is this how I'm supposed to be? No, this is not how you're supposed to be. Well, you're allowed to have a lot of fun.
My reading of that is if you spend that much time focusing on caring, like that was her role, then we can see and we sort of mourn the loss of her life. She's not dying, but we feel like she's wasted a lot of time to that.
And I will say also, I think that I'm also glad that they did show that side of her, because a lot of women did play that role during that time, and a lot of us are grateful for it. So, and I think they did a good job of it. Yes, they may have omitted other parts of her life, but what they did show, they did it really well. 5 stars from me, Susie.
5 stars from me, Susie. What's for homework next week?
Your Name Engraved Herein. It's a Taiwanese gay film on Netflix.
Wow. Hey, Suzy Wrong, It's a Sin has one of the best soundtracks in streaming TV at the moment.
Oh, Blondie!
And this is Blondie from that very soundtrack. Suzy Wrong, let's have a chat next week.